Back here on SportsLine, and we are joined now by our good buddy Jonathan Hutton of Outkick. And Jay Hutt, we were all waiting for this day. I think in some ways we had this specific day circled on the calendar for a long time of best case scenario that Derrick Henry gets back on the field. So now that we're here, and he was on the field today at practice, what do you make about the timeline it took for him to get back and the potential that it brings to this Titans team as they get set for the playoffs?
They're true Super Bowl contenders now, Steve. You know, they were contenders for the AFC going into the playoffs because currently they had the number 1 overall seed before the news today that Henry is on track and he's been designated to return. So we knew they were contenders for the AFC because they were 1 win away based on their seed from hosting the AFC Championship game in Nashville. But they are true contenders to hoist the Lombardi Trophy with Derrick Henry a part of their offense. He brings explosion back. They average 2.5 more explosive plays per game with Derrick Henry in the lineup as opposed to being out of the lineup. And part of that accounts for A.J. Brown as well. But their explosion efforts took a spill whenever A.J. went out of the lineup and they were left without Derrick Henry. Now they have A.J. back. He's playing full stride, full strength. And Henry looked ready to go. I just saw snippets from practice that Channel 5 and others had and PK. But if you told me that this was August and he was going through the motions, getting ready for a training camp practice, I don't think you could really tell the difference except for the grass was brown instead of green today, right? Like that's really the only thing that would designate, okay, it's January and not August for what Henry was doing. Point being, you couldn't really tell, at least I couldn't, that the guy was coming off of a foot injury. And because of that, I think things are very optimistic for a team that has been pointing, you're right, circling for this time period as they prepare for the playoffs, and they hope they have 2 more weeks before they need him. And look, the players started chatting about him a bit last week post-game, and whenever they started talking about it in Clay's report over the weekend that he was running full strength, full stride, full go without a limp, to me, that was a sign that he was very, very close. And I think everything has been exactly on track, if not ahead of schedule right now. I think it's a great sign for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, so Jonathan, I was out there today and I got to see him, and there was no sign of a limp in the portion we saw, which was just stretching an individual, not much. There was never a reason for him to ramp up to a full speed for us to know if that explosion is there right off the bat. What's your biggest concern in his return right now? Is it being able to be that explosive back that he was, or is it a workload issue when he works his way back into the lineup?
Yeah, I think it's the workload issue. I don't think it's that he's going to be ready to go full strength. I don't think Henry would be where he is right now if he were not ready to go. I think everything based on what we saw today is a great sign. Everything that we've heard internally, what we're hearing outside, all of it is a great sign that he's ready to go. But keep in mind, you bring up a great point about the workload, because the workload prior to Kansas City. So let's just roll through kind of what he means to the offense and the bulk of carries. So Arizona was Arizona. They shut him down in week 1. But if you take a snapshot from week 2 to week 6, which is Seattle to Buffalo, and right before the Kansas City game, and I'm excluding that because he didn't rush for 100 yards in that game. And then the following week was the week they went to Indianapolis, and he played through and played on a broken foot. So from Seattle to Buffalo, 35 carries, 182 yards, 3 touchdowns against Seattle. 28 carries, 113 yards, 33 carries, 157 and a touchdown. And then back-to-back weeks leading into that Kansas City game where he had 6 combined touchdowns, 3 in each game. And he combined in those 2 games leading up to KC, 59 carries for 273 yards over 2 weeks. He was on pace through 6 games for 459 carries on the season and 2,200 yards rushing. I mean, it's nuts. And 28 rushing touchdowns which would have tied the individual record for most touchdowns in a season. That's what the guy was on pace for through a month and a half. I don't know if that's the workload we're going to see when they potentially host a divisional round playoff game at Nissan Stadium. So concern, I guess that would be number one. But aside from that, based on the way that the defense is playing and based on the way they've been running the football without him, I think he comes in and he looks a heck of a lot like the version that we saw when he left off.
So even if you get him back and it's 20 carries and not 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, you get him along with a healthy A.J. Brown and Julio Jones at whatever level he comes back in. How much different can this offense be, you think, in the postseason from really the one we've seen at any point in time during the regular season?
Well, I think where they'll be different is early on in games in the first half. There was a stretch where they put up 27 points, 20 points, 26 points. I mean, I'm averaging the scores there, but they were starting fast, and then they started fast in Kansas City as well. We know the ending result there. Going back real quick to the workload thing, I think it's also important to note, and when I say concern, I don't know if there's a real concern there, because through all of this, there has not been a considerable drop-off in the effectiveness of the run game. So if he's down from 30 carries to 20 carries, that means Deontay Foreman is available, and we know he should be worked in to the overall offensive lineup, because at the time, I mean, they had Darrington Evans, who couldn't stay healthy, and Jeremy McNichols, who they refused to hand the football off to. If he was on the field, it was a passing play. It was guaranteed pass if he was on the field. And with Henry, it was a run for the most part, and for good reason. He runs the ball effectively. But if you're taking carries away to work on not wanting to overdo it, they've found a guy that's going to be here for a while in Deontay Foreman, because the guy has shown up and proven himself. Dontrell Hilliard too. But with all of that, considering A.J. Brown and Julio Jones and Nick Westbrook-Akina, and maybe they can get some work out of Ferkser, although nothing's guaranteed there. Nothing's guaranteed with Julio. I like the options that Ryan Tannehill has, and Tannehill is at his best when play action is working. And when Derrick Henry's on the field, play action works, especially to A.J. Brown.
Yeah, and I got to think he'll see some different defenses too. Teams haven't stopped trying to stack the box against the Titans because they understand that they want to run the football first and foremost. But it's different when number 22 is in the backfield versus Deontay Foreman or Dontrell Hilliard. There's no question about that. Are you with me at all on the Julio Jones thing? I know you kind of heard the monologue at the beginning, if you will. I mean, we haven't seen him be anything close to what Julio Jones has been throughout the course of his career. If he gives them 3 catches a game moving forward, that's an improvement from what we've seen up until now.
That's huge. And I think there will be some moments where Julio is going to have to step up. First of all, he's got to stay healthy. Like, the guy's good for about a half of football right now. Like, if you're making if you have a sports wagering app right now in the state of Tennessee, you're taking the under on catches, because at least I would, because I think the hamstring is going to play a factor in every single game. And that's even after he was on IR for 3 weeks. Point being, Steve, he's got to play a role in all this, because while I think we saw a lot of the same defensive efforts against the Titans' run game, I think with Henry, if it's 3rd and 7, you still have to respect the fact that 22 is on the field, if he's on the field on 3rd and 7, or 2nd and 7, where it's a second and pass situation. I don't necessarily think you have to do that with the current running back group, because, again, without him there, for the most part, the explosive plays weren't happening. Or in the case of Foreman, he's had a couple of big runs that were called back due to holds or other things going on, and that's not on him. But the other part of the defensive effort, I think you could stack the box against Foreman and Hilliard, because you weren't worried about the wide receivers getting separation, and you could cover them with one person and use the extra man against the run, which was the Titans' identity. And if you stop the run, you stop their offense, because the wide receivers were not going to get open, and Tannehill is going to get sacked. And now with A.J. back, you have to respect that. Julio's going to be in man coverage. He's going to have one person to beat. And we saw in Seattle, he's perfectly capable of making some big grabs. He had a touchdown ripped away from him in that game in the back of the end zone. We know he can still make some plays. Tannehill's going to put it on him if he's open. And I would suspect if Julio can get open, he's going to make the catch. We've seen that throughout his career. I'm more concerned about whether or not he's available, and that's the big uncertainty with him. There's pretty much no other guy on the offensive group that I have that big question about, right? I mean, Saffold played through a lot of banged up days. I know he missed a game, but I can't think of another player that I'm really concerned about game in, game out, like I am with Julio Jones. And that's the biggest issue, I think, with consistency with him, is he's just not available.
Well, one of the positives for the Titans right now is when you look at their injured list for the first time all season, one, it's shorter than it's been for a long time, but two, when you look at a lot of those injuries, you know that Roger Saffold's going to line up and play, and you can say that for just about everybody on the list until you get to Julio Jones and you see that hamstring. And as you mentioned, that's going to be a question mark probably all the way until the end of the season, whenever that may be for the Titans this year. We're talking with Jonathan Hutton of Outkick with us here on SportsLine tonight. Jonathan, on the defensive side of the ball, I was looking at some numbers, and it is remarkable. One, the improvement of the pass rush this year compared to last year. They've got more than double the sacks and pressures that they had last year when they had no pass rush at all. So one, that's remarkable improvement of its own right. But two, they are markedly better when Bud Dupree's on the field. And we've talked a lot about how good Jeffrey Simmons has been this year and how good Danico Autry has been this year. I think you can make an argument both those guys should have been in the Pro Bowl, as should Harold Landry, who has a career high in sacks. Those guys have all been great. Dupree's battled with some injuries, but there is no question that when he's on the field, that unit as a whole is way better than when he is not on the field. How big of an impact does a healthy Bud Dupree make for this team as they get set to make this playoff run?
Well, I mean, it is the exclamation point on what has been a superb defense all season, right? I mean, even when Dupree was trying to battle back through coming off the ACL injury and he was gradually getting more consistent and more reps, I mean, the defense was still stepping up and making some big plays. And I think now, Steve, we're going to see the defensive front be among the best fronts on the defensive side of the football in the postseason period, because Simmons and Autry are just demons in the trenches. They are, going back and watching some of the plays that they put up against that Miami offensive line is remarkable. I mean, Miami's offensive line was one massive turnstile in this game. Tua was running left and right, and there was no consistency there. And the real consistency has been in the interior of that front with Autry and Simmons. And now that Dupree can be that X factor that we haven't seen, and I think I'm with you. I think over the last 3-4 games, we have seen him really come on and hit a stride. If we get that version of Dupree, if we're witnessing that, I think we're seeing the quarterback hit the ground often throughout these games. And when you think about who they're going to be facing, Mahomes, they want to make sure they control the pocket with him, and they want to get pressure up the middle. Josh Allen, they want to control the edge and force him back inside and then drop him. They've done a really good job with Josh Allen in the past, game plan-wise. Those are the two threats. And then Justin Herbert, who is very similar with his mobility and can throw in the move. They're going to need Dupree. And Dupree has been a terror in the last couple of weeks, sideline to sideline. I like where they're headed in the addition of Zach Cunningham. And I mean, there are a lot of positives to point to. They've only allowed, over their last, 4 home games, they've allowed a total of 42 points. And right now they have the opportunity with a win on the road this week to host every single playoff game on the road to the Super Bowl at Nissan Stadium. This is it's lining up really, really well for Mike Vrabel's group.
Yeah, in the last 4 games, they've allowed less than 10 points a game total. So this defense has definitely rounded into form in the second half of the season, a season in which they played well overall. You mentioned Zach Cunningham, the addition from the Texans. Last time we saw Houston in November here, he was playing for Lovie Smith's defense. Now he's in the middle for the Titans in that position. Obviously, that's a huge addition when you add the guy who led the league in tackles a season ago. But he comes into a position where a lot of guys have played for the Titans this year, and all of them have had their moments of being incredibly effective, but they've all dealt with injuries that have kept them out of the lineup, whether it's Rashaan Evans or Jayon Brown or David Long, Tamani Rice, who's out for the season. I mean, all of them had their moments in the lineup, and then all of them had their moments out of the lineup because of injury. At the moment, other than Rice, everybody's back available, along with Cunningham. Who are the best two linebackers to play for this team in the postseason?
I think it's Cunningham and David Long Jr. personally. And Long was going to be a starter whenever Jayon came back anyway, but Long got banged up and missed time with that concussion. What was it, 5 weeks? Or was it a concussion? Everything's running together with all their injuries. But he missed 5 games. And he was on pace based on the reps he was getting and where he was in the depth chart and how he was playing over Jayon anyway. Jayon was going to be the reserve guy, going to be the third down guy. And really that's where he excelled in his rookie season early on in the playoff run. But think about this. I mean, the 2019 playoff run is whenever Jayon got hurt. He hurt his shoulder again in that win in New England, and they had to put the rookie on the field and David Long Jr. And last year, Brown was on injured reserve. Evans was banged up, and they were in the playoffs there. I mean, this will be the first time that they had depth going into the postseason at the linebacker position. I think that's huge. And they now have experience because they've had to play these guys. And I think the best backer, all-around backer right now is Cunningham, because he's going to play the run. And while he's not known for being this great cover guy, they have someone playing next to him who can use his legs and mobility and speed to do that. And Cunningham can play in space okay. I mean, we've seen him make some plays in space and track down the would-be ball carrier. So I'm excited to see how he fits into this defense long-term, because this is a long-term move. It's a gift from Houston. And he's going to factor in just like Longest, because you've got Evans and Brown who are free agents after this year. And because of that, I think you're looking at the two starters in the postseason and forward as Cunningham and Long. And to me, there's no question that they want Cunningham as a starter. They worked him as a starter the first week he was available. So I think it's a given. He's going to be on the field as much as possible.
You mentioned all the injuries that this team has gone through. I understand there have been injuries in Green Bay. I understand that Matt LaFleur's done an incredible job up there, and they're going to be the 1 seed in the NFC. I get that Zach Taylor's done a great job with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase to win the AFC North with the Bengals. I understand all of that. But how in the world does anybody vote for NFL Coach of the Year and not put down the name Mike Vrabel, given the fact that the Titans have used an NFL record 89 players, which is 5 more than anybody else ever? They've had maybe the guy who was destined to be the MVP of the league as a running back, as absurd as that was, over the first half of the season, missed the last half of the season. They've had their top 2 wide receivers out huge chunks of the season. The defense has had a huge turnaround. Who's the architect of the defense? It's Mike Vrabel. And somehow they win 11 games, probably 12. They repeat as AFC South champions, and they're going to be the number 1 seed. How does anybody vote for anybody for that award with a straight face and not put Mike Vrabel's name down?
I don't know, but I'll say this. I think Vrabel's going to win it, and it's because they're about to lock up the 1 seed. I don't think they go to Houston and lose. They're about to lock up the 1 seed. And as you well know, or at least I believe you agree with me on this, for the most part, there are some very in-depth, talented NFL media members who dive in and watch teams week in and week out. And then there are this handful that just latch on to whatever the storyline is that week, and they follow that narrative. Going into last week, the last 2 weeks, the storyline was Matt LaFleur is going to be coach of the year in Green Bay. Prior to that, it was Bill Belichick was going to be coach of the year in New England. But after LaFleur, all of a sudden, over the last 2 weeks, due to Joe Burrow, Zach Taylor is going to be coach of the year in Cincinnati. And I'm willing to place some money on the fact that when the Titans are the 1 seed And the narrative turns into, look at the Tennessee Titans, who, if you look at their games missed due to injured players through week 17, Steve, the top 5, Giants with 332 games missed based on injury, the Ravens at 322, the Titans at 321 games combined with players out, Jets and Lions. And the takeaway in that list, the Titans are the 1 seed, and the rest of these teams are positioning themselves now for the offseason in the NFL draft. Yep. They're not going to the postseason. That's the difference. And that's what will be pointed out whenever the Titans latch onto the 1 seed, because a lot of the national media will actually pay attention to the Titans for once. I don't think they watch a whole lot of Titans football. That's my personal opinion on it. I think they just latch on to what others are saying about the Titans. And because of that, they're just about ready to give them some credit as they latch onto the 1 seed and become a storyline that they are forced to talk about. The storyline right now is they're the 1 seed, and they're the worst 1 seed we've ever seen. And when they actually lock it down with a win in Houston, there's going to be some respect factor to them because they're getting Derrick Henry back, and people are going to realize what they missed out on with this whole stretch run of what Vrabel pulled off.
Yeah, it's impossible to look at them analytically because they haven't been anything like the team they're supposed to be all season long.
Exactly.
Analytically. And they may finally get to that at the perfect time of the season, which is why, again, Henry coming back today is so exciting for people. You talk about these guys around the league who don't always watch football, and then, they're charged with voting for these things, like MVP. For instance, Jonathan, do you think to be the MVP of the league, you have to be vaccinated?
I do not. It is not the most vaccinated player. That's not what MVP stands for.
Tell Hub Arkish that.
Hub Arkish even said that on the field, Aaron Rodgers is the most valuable player.
Oh my
and I'm
gosh.
thinking, well, based on that, yeah, you're right. He's the MVP this year. No one's going to argue that. And while he may not be a unanimous vote, and this isn't the Heisman vote, for those that don't know, you get 1 vote. It's not like you vote for 3 players and they tally these things up. The way the AP works, there's 50 people that vote. I have no idea how they determine who that is. Hub has a vote. He's been in the league.
He's been covering
it's a lot like the Heisman Trophy. I have no idea who votes for the Heisman either. I just know that it's made up of some former winners as well as media members. And in this case, Arkish is just letting his personal feelings get in the way of the clear and obvious choice. Now, there's not always that every year. I mean, Lamar Jackson was unanimous, but prior to that year, Patrick Mahomes lost out on votes to Drew Brees. So, Tom Brady will get some votes. Jonathan Taylor will get some votes. But, I don't think you need to clarify anything by saying you're not voting for Rodgers because of something that he's choosing to do off the field. Pro Football Hall of Fame voters have to put personal feelings aside all the time and vote on whether or not someone's Hall of Fame worthy. The MVP vote, to me, is a lot simpler than that.
100%. It's all about what you do on the field, and Aaron Rodgers has done it on the field just like he did last year. Final thing for you, Hutton, before I let you go. News coming out today that the NFL is sort of circling around and trying to look at potential contingency plans for the Super Bowl. We all know that COVID cases are rising pretty much everywhere around the country. They're at record levels in the state of California, which is now imposing restrictions again. Some of those include capacity limitations for their stadiums. The Super Bowl is scheduled for SoFi Stadium, February the 13th in Inglewood, California. That obviously could play a factor. What do you think is likely to happen? The report today that they reached out to Dallas, the Cowboys say, welcome down to Arlington, AT&T Stadium's yours if you need it. How quickly does the NFL have to make this call, do you think, and what do they ultimately do?
I think they have to make it by next week, and I believe either over the weekend or early next week, the NFL will go to L.A., where they will go to meet at the stadium, and they'll meet with stadium officials. They'll meet with the Rams and Chargers who are hosting the Super Bowl. They will meet with city officials and state of California officials to determine what they're going to do. I don't think the NFL wants to move the game if at all possible.
Yeah.
Because logistically, it is a nightmare. I mean, you've been there. Some of our viewers tonight may have been there. It's just nuts. And to pick up everything and move it within a couple of weeks, logistically, it would, for lack of a better phrase, it would just dumb things down a bit. The teams aren't going to arrive to the Super Bowl city in Los Angeles until 2 days prior to kickoff. So it'll be like a normal road trip. I think most of the work will be done that week at their facilities. But aside from that, that wouldn't change. But aside from that, I think the media coverage would certainly change drastically because you're uprooting and trying to change everything and try to finding hotels. I don't know how you go about redoing the ticket process for people that are paying. It's sponsors, by the way. It's not like an average fan goes to the Super Bowl. This thing is the who's who and big-time sponsors paying thousands and thousands of dollars for that seat. I don't know how they determine the ticket process and moving that to Arlington instead of SoFi. I mean, it's a headache and a nightmare. I'm glad I don't have to cover that beat because that is some. I mean, my guess is they've been discussing this privately, and someone with the Cowboys finally got a phone call, and because they're calling around, to me, they're actually considering moving it based on the protocols and just the stats that are in place right now. Yep. With everything COVID related in California compared to Dallas. And look, they had a stadium last year in Tampa, that they went through. I don't think they want to go through another year where they're limited capacity in any way. Right. And because of that, that's why they're also factoring in what you just pointed out, the limited capacity restrictions and everything else. I don't think this has to do with masks. I think it's about the capacity, the fans in place, and the sponsorship dollars that are logistically tied to the big game. And how do they handle it? That's a great question. I'm fascinated to follow this. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that meeting. No kidding. And remember, SoFi Stadium was supposed to host the Super Bowl last year, and they already moved it back because of issues that they had then, and that's how Tampa got into the calendar last year for the Super Bowl. If they have to move it again, that would be a huge mess, and then it's way down the road because the next several years are set up for other cities. So that would be a disaster for LA, for those teams out there, and certainly for the NFL at this point in time. Jonathan Hutton, man, this was fun. I don't get to do this long form with you all that often. Had a lot of fun tonight. Can't wait to catch up with you again Sunday night on the Electric Power Company's Sunday Sports Central. It's going to be a great recap show on Sunday night, getting ready for the postseason. And my guess is we'll be getting ready for the divisional round. We'll be previewing a lot of wild card matchups to determine who the Titans are going to play. Yep, a lot of football to talk about over the next few weeks. Jonathan Hutton, always a pleasure. Jonathan Hutton from Outkick joining us here tonight on SportsLine here on News Channel 5+. Got to take a break. When we come back, we'll hear from some of the Titans on Derrick Henry's return right after this.